How being dependable becomes a burden. Hello, my name is Jewel. How many of you would describe yourself as dependable? Dependability is usually described as a strength. It is considered a good quality. It is rewarded. It becomes part of how people are trusted. Dependability is not wrong, and responsibility is not bad. But for many people, dependability eventually becomes a burden. It becomes a burden when dependability stops being a choice and becomes a role the human operating system feels required to maintain. This video explains how that shift happens structurally. There is a difference between dependability as a function and dependability as a role. Dependability as a function is simple. It means when you commit to something, you follow through. It is bounded. It has an endpoint. Dependability as a role is different. It becomes a continuous identity position the operating system maintains to preserve stability. So let's look at it from the lens of the role form. As a role, dependability includes preventing other people's distress, absorbing consequences, being the one who handles it, maintaining a predictable output, even when depleted. At that point, dependability stops being about follow through. It becomes about stability management. Here is an important clarification. A person can have real responsibilities, like caring for an elderly parent, and still carry additional role load that is not required by the responsibility itself. Dependability becomes a burden when the operating system links it to continuity. The system begins predicting consequence if dependability drops. Here are some examples. If I don't handle this, things will fall apart. If I am not dependable, people won't trust me. If I don't show up, I will cause conflict or disappointment. This is actually a threat binding. Dependability becomes associated with safety. The operating system then maintains dependability even when the person is exhausted, misaligned, or no longer consenting to the role. Once dependability becomes role-based, it expands. It spreads beyond actual commitments into ongoing vigilance. The person begins monitoring what might be needed, what might go wrong, who might be disappointed, how to prevent disruption. This expansion is not part of dependability. It is continuity management added to dependability. That is why the burden grows. The system is not only completing tasks, it is preventing instability. I'm going to provide a real-life example. Caring for an elderly parent whose memory is declining. It is one I have been experiencing and discovering how to apply what I'm discussing in these videos to my real life. Caring for an elderly parent is a real responsibility. The function may include managing appointments, transportation, medication coordination, home safety, financial logistics, paying bills, communication with providers. That function can remain fully intact. The burden appears when the human operating system adds role load on top of the function. Role load often looks like being responsible for the parent's emotional state, preventing family conflict at all costs, trying to make everyone approve of your decisions, over explaining every choice to avoid backlash, carrying guilt as a permanent companion, treating being dependable as proof of worth, acting as the sole stabilizer for the entire family system. I have noticed myself experiencing most of this. I have had to collapse and shift and rewire. Those additions are not the responsibility, they are continuity management. The structural distinction is function. What must actually be done? Role load, what the operating system adds to prevent instability. Several markers tend to appear when dependability becomes role-based. Dependability feels heavy even for small tasks. There is pressure before anything happens. The system cannot rest after completion because it is scanning for the next demand. Boundaries feel disruptive because the role is tied to stability. The person begins feeling responsible for outcomes that are not actually theirs to carry. In caregiving, this often shows up as resting feels wrong. Taking off or taking time off creates guilt. Saying no feels like a threat. Feeling like no level of effort is enough. These markers or signals indicate that dependability has shifted from a function into a role. When the role releases, dependability becomes simpler. Commitments become clearer and more limited. Follow through remains possible, but it is no longer driven by threat. The system stops maintaining dependability to protect stability. Dependability becomes a choice again. In caregiving terms, the responsibilities remain. The appointments still happen. Support is still provided, but the added role load drops. You stop managing everyone's reactions. You stop performing dependability to prove worth. You stop carrying guilt as evidence of responsibility. You stop acting as the sole stabilizer. Dependability becomes a choice again. It becomes coherent. The person can follow through, but the burden drops because the identity position is no longer being maintained. In closing, dependability becomes a burden when it stops being a function and becomes a role. The human operating system maintains the role when it believes continuity may be at risk. This links dependability to threat, identity, and stability management. The result is pressure, vigilance, and exhaustion. When the role releases, dependability remains, but it becomes bounded and coherent. The next video clarifies why the pressure to stay consistent intensifies when dependability becomes identity-based.